feel like we have a really great group here tonight. And then I'm just gonna do, so what we're gonna do is I am gonna give a lecture on the history of collage as well as tools and techniques. So we'll go through that. And then we're gonna dive into creating our own. And then after that, I wanna spend a few minutes at the end so that we can do a gallery walk and share our creations, and then do the obligatory group photo, right? And then I do want to save a little time at the end for a survey, because this is our first collage class here, as well as we want to start building a more extensive art program. And so you guys, if you could just help with that, it's just a couple minutes. I'd really appreciate it. So, and then we are recording the presentation part, so feel free to ask questions, but I'll repeat the question so for the recording. Okay, cool. So really excited to make mushroom collages with you all tonight. But I did want to ask the question, what is collage? Because it can look very different, right, throughout history. The mushroom photo collage at the top, so that's a combination of watercolor and photography, is about 150 years old, done by a Victorian woman in her personal commonplace book or journal that she for herself and her family. And then the mountainy photo, that's a Japanese technique that's all using torn papers. So 100% that's all paper there, just torn by hand. And then up at the top, you have a canivette, which was sort of the precursor to the Valentine, and it was a religious practice that was done. And then, you know, you have some at the bottom here, the famous Picasso piece that I'll come back to later. We have some herbaria, which is the one in the middle, which is their way of documenting nature and plants, which is today, if you come to some of our other mushroom classes, we teach people how to do that with their cell phone and using an app called iNaturalist. But back then, even before illustrations, they used the actual pressing of the plants, and so that was a collage of its own. And then we have Barbara Kruger's work on the left, which is more of a social commentary about women and women's rights. So all over the board. So the question is, what is this thing that unites all of these things? So collage comes from the word couler, which means to glue in French. And it's the art of assembling different, often unrelated materials into a new composition. And so really what I want to impress upon you tonight is that it can be anything. You can use literally anything to collage, right? So it can be scraps of material that you might find in the floor. It can be leftover fabric from a quilting project. It can be buttons. It can be found objects. It could be stuff you found at an antique store. We'll get into more about what you can do with it. But it's such a great medium because it's so flexible and inclusive. And so tonight we're going to do something that's more restrained. We'll do a paper collage, but again, with lots of different types of materials. But just wanted you to get a sense, and that's the purpose of going through the history, is how expansive it could be. So if you are interested in going broader, this is a place to kick that off. And I wanted to share my hot take for the night, which is that collage has always been a legitimate art form. It's not like sort of, if you squint the right way, it legitimately has always been an art form. But often in history, it's not perceived that way always, right? And there are some real historical reasons for that. Back in the day, there was craft, which happened in the home and was really the women's domain. So sort of the upper class women were trained in a number of crafts to make them more desirable as wives, right? Like embroidery being a good example. And then art was more reserved in the public spaces, which was predominantly men, right? Men who worked. So collage firmly lived in the first category for most of history until the 1900s. And so therefore, it was considered like this lower art form of craft. And this is very much like a European construct. We'll see pretty quickly how like hundreds of years ago, collage was done all over the world, but in the European construct, it was considered that way. So we're going to take a look tonight how really this was a wonderful art form throughout history, and it really was a catalyst throughout history as well to with some of our major cultural milestones. But let's take a step back and talk about where it started, which was with paper. So we wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for paper, for lots of reasons, but certainly for collage. And paper showed up in China around 100 CE. There's some debate about that because they found this fragment of a map in 179 BCE. But as soon as the paper started showing up, people started doing fun things with paper. So there's things even very early on of paper cutting, which is a related technique of creating these very elaborate designs through cutting of paper. And then this is one of the modalities I wanted to talk about. This happened in 900 CE, so like 1,000 years, right, before supposedly collage was invented. And in this is similar to that picture I showed you on the first screen where it's all done with torn paper. So this is a beautiful poem that was written on top of it, but behind it is meant to be a mountain and forest scene, and that was all done by paper that they torn, handmade paper that then they created this beautiful, beautiful scene. This is called Chi Gira. And so this is still practiced today too, broadly, and there's some really beautiful examples of it. Then we fast forward to the 18th century. This part is interesting because when we start seeing collage show up in European culture, it really started in quiet spaces. So still within, you could call it the home or the monastery construct. And these were artifacts of devotion. So they were creating these beautiful, elaborate elements. So for example, in this one, you have the paper cutting behind, right? So all of that is cut by hand. And then you have this beautiful piece on top, wood on top. And there's a ton of examples out here, but these were devotion, but in a religious sense. And then this would also be something that nuns would sell, people would buy these for baptisms, weddings, funerals, that type of a thing, but it's very much a spiritual practice. It's also considered one of the precursors to the Valentine, which is a different type of devotion. And then one thing I wanted to share here, I think this is super cool. So there's two things I wanted to share. So Mary Delaney was one of these higher class women that spent her life, doing crafts as she was supposed to do because she's a good woman. And then at some point, her eyes became too poor to really do embroidery anymore. And one day she kind of looked over on her bedside table and she noticed this red paper really looked a lot like a petal of a flower. And so then she started creating these. This is a paper mosaic, is how she would describe it. But these are all tiny bits of paper that she cut up and glued onto this backdrop. And she wanted these to be as realistic as possible. So just again, as the same way that we would see illustrators create those beautiful scientific illustrations, she would collage it instead. And Darwin's grandfather actually said he thought hers were more true to life than illustrations because a pencil could obscure, what the actual size and so forth, but paper didn't lie in the same way that a pencil could lie. So that's quite a bit of praise. And the fact that she did it at 72 was pretty cool. So, you still have time, guys, to do your opus. And then instead is the thing we were talking about before, herbaria. So that's, again, the pressed flowers, but there's tens of thousands of species that were found and documented in this fashion all over Europe. All right. And so one other thing we're going to move to now is the Victorian explosion. And this is, there's an interesting cross-section of factors happening here. One is that all of a sudden paper goods became more mass-produced. And so there's a lot more materials out there, right? And then it started becoming fashionable, again, in the domain, the domestic domain for higher class women who had the time to start creating things. They would call them parlor collages, as an example. I found this one really fascinating. Even young girls would create these things. And so it was popular to, they were like basically vision boards. So it's popular to create your entire, this is my ideal life I want to have. And so she has, this girl, Helen, created this book, and it's 20 or 30 pages of this type of stuff. But this is her imagining herself in her parlor, and she's using all types of materials, right? Like wallpaper and scraps from, catalogs and, hand-created art and so forth. Maybe that's her child framed over there. And it's just showing like, oh yes, this is my opulent life I'm going to have when, she has another one where there's 10 kids of pictures, and it's like, I'm gonna have 10 kids, and, but very elaborate, but within the home. And similar to the one on the right, there's something called commonplace books. And so it was sort of like a journal or a scrapbook, but sometimes they were very like elaborate and really artistic, but typically they're meant for within the home realm, right? So it might be like here, this person is like taking a photo collage type principle, right, and mixing it with watercolor. And instead of, your normal face cards, it's like, oh, my family's face cards, because we're fancy, right? We're like just as fancy as the king and queen. So that's why it says, who are the Trumps? But or what are Trumps? And then down in the bottom half, you have two other things that were very popular. On the left, they called these scrap screens, like scrapbooking, but screens. And these are very popular things to put in your parlor. And really, it's like a huge collage, right? And then on the right, of course, we have a Valentine. I can't believe I found one with the mushroom, but I'm so happy I did. But this is like, when I think about like early collage, that's what I think about, is because there were so many materials that they had at their disposal, and it became such a thing. It was mass produced, but not the way that we think of it. There's actually women in these places like using all these materials and putting it together, and then the beloved would buy it and give it to his beloved as a, this is what I made for you thing, which is really interesting. Some people speculate even that they made them like slightly not perfect to make it look like they were more handmade, which is interesting. So that's just kind of like an overview of what was happening with the Victorian area and why it's often considered craft. There's one thing I want to show you before we get into more contemporary work, though, and it's this. So I find this really fascinating because when I look at that, I'm like, that's art, that's not craft. This is a commonplace book, but it is by a gentleman who was, well established in both politics and in business, but his true love was collage. And he created this big book, weirdly, as a wedding gift to his daughter. It's called the Blood Book because he has this dripping blood looking thing on every single page, but it is meant to be devotional and like kind of a spiritual thing, but there's literally snakes on every single page. It's really bizarre, but to me, like, I've seen a lot of contemporary collage that has a lot of these similar elements, and you'll see when we get into some of the more modern eras, they also are using a lot of very similar techniques where you're using, found artwork, but positioning it in a new way to create a new composition or to create a new theme or message. But keep in mind, this guy was doing it in a commonplace book, which was considered craft, right? So then we're going to move on to where the official first collage was made. Yes, exactly. And so this next section, I'm going to go through a few different art movements, and I think really the theme here is how collage was such an adaptable, malleable form that really it really helped all of them in their movement really move their art forward. And I think that just speaks to how flexible collage can be. And so we can start with Cubism, right? And their big thing is, like just one perspective isn't real, it's an illusion, right? If you think about like what the artist that came before them was trying to create what looked like reality, but it wasn't, right? And that's why you get a lot of these different perspectives that Picasso did. But they started using collage because it was a different way of really emphasizing that message without it getting really messy with all the different faces and different perspectives of the face. And so they use the same message but in a different way. Like instead of it just being different angles of face, it's like, I'm going to use different mediums or different tools together to create the same thing of you can have multiple perspectives at the same time. And so Picasso is credited as, in 1912, as the first one to do a collage, although interestingly is more of a assemblage because it used more physical materials, like you see the chair caning and the rope around it, and there's an oilcloth in there as well. And then his contemporary, Braque, created what is the first 2D collage on the left. And even though he's very talented as creating wood grain, he intentionally used a wooden wallpapery type thing, and blended that with his charcoal. Again, using these different perspectives in order to create a new work of art. And then these are a few other art movements that came after. And so I just wanted to touch on them a little bit just to show how collage was kind of a milestone in all of these. So the one at the top, on the top left, is by Hannah Hawk, and she's a very prolific collagist. This one was called Cut with the Kitchen Knife, Dada. And it was, Dada was really all about taking down like the World War I and the disillusion from it. And especially in the art world where it's like, you guys had such, you were idyllic. And look what you did with that. Look at all the atrocities you did. I don't trust sort of like the traditional art philosophies and values anymore. And collage was such a powerful tool because they actually used propaganda materials or other things where they could take like these political type posters and from the newspaper and like turn it on its head and work again against them and kind of show a totally different point of view, right? So this is them really digging into the current political scene by doing that. And then the one on the right is a constructivism piece, and so it was a Russian art movement, and it was all about that. This is when communism was coming about, and it was all about art needs to be a tool just like everything else. And so collage was just a very easy way to do that, right? It was easy to mass produce these things. And so this was like more of their propaganda. I mean, this wasn't propaganda necessarily in a bad way. She was encouraging people to read. But the point that art for them in their society needs to be something that's functional, not just something that's pretty. And then the one on the bottom right is a futurism piece. And this futurism was all about modernization and machinery and motion. And so collage was a really great tool to be able to show the chaos of the modern times and to be able to show the motion by creating all these different pieces. It was easier for the artist to construct that in collage versus in a painting. And then lastly, I wanted to end on surrealism because this is like a very big theme of collage and really where it went after this. Even today, there's a ton of surrealist collages out there. It's a very popular form of collage. And so here we have, and I have the book back there if you guys want to look at it, by Max Ernst. The book was called A Week of Kindness, and he feverishly created this over 3 weeks. And he takes these old these old drawings, right? But he like changes them completely to change the meaning of it. So this one has like a bird's head, right, on a gentleman. But they're pretty chaotic and very odd themes, but that was his style for sure. He's one of the really well-known surrealist collages with Dali as well. So that was just a little take. And like, again, the message here is that it is so flexible, and it's also been used throughout history because it's so flexible to really spread the message that the artist is trying to convey. And then from here, this is the last slide about history, but collage moved from, talking about like the art concept into it being a vehicle of change, right? So that one on the bottom left is considered to be the first piece that is considered to be pop art, which is really interesting because it's collage. It's called Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing? And he used all different types of magazines and images to portray this couple with all of their, possessions, and it's kind of keeping up with the Joneses things that was really popular in the 50s. And so this was resisting against this consumerism that was so popular at that time. And then from there, we, during like the Vietnam War, there's a woman called Martha Rosler who was a classically trained artist, and she did this beautiful series called House Beautiful, Bringing the War Home. But she refused to have these things be shown in galleries because she didn't want it on the wall. She wanted it to be in activist hands. So she would go to rallies and pass these things out. And this is a really common, again, juxtaposition, right? But with a more powerful message. Here you have this family lounging in their luxurious new mattress. Meanwhile, the war is all around them, right? And so that's a lot of the messaging here, is trying to teach people to wake up. And then the last one I have on here is like very popular zine culture from the 70s and 80s. And I think this is a pivotal moment because this is when it came back into all of our hands, right? And they were really great. We're still spreading a message, right? Like fighting against the system. But it also was like photocopying became huge and making collages and so forth. And really the message here is that it's a tool that all of us can use. It's very inclusive, right? I agree that there's no bad collages, right? Like certainly we can improve our techniques or learn new techniques and figure out like when to use the rules, when to break the rules, but ultimately it's very inclusive, and that's what's so cool about it. So that's your history lesson for the day. We'll just get into the meat of it, why you thought you were coming here. Okay, so what I want to do next is I'm going to take you through just materials, tools, and then techniques. And so these are sort of just to get you started. Again, like you really can use anything, whether it's two-dimensional, three-dimensional. But I tend mostly to do two-dimensional or some sort of like raised three-dimensional stuff. And so I really focus on, I do a lot of found paper stuff. So that could be anything. I created a collage as a demonstration one. I pulled out some stuff I collected when I was in high school, which is crazy. But like the reality is I use some of it. Like you can use anything. So newspapers, magazines, which are common, but then we get into old art, money, sheet music, tickets, receipts, photos, wallpaper, letters, stamps. I used to go into antique stores. You probably don't do this anymore because everything is like more valuable now, but I would just go in there and they still would have all this stuff that like families would just donate their grandparents' stuff when they died or whatever. And so I would just go in there and for nothing, just buy like sheet music and old photos and stamps and stuff because they were worthless. And I feel like everything costs money with eBay, but but yeah. And then the other stuff I wanted to mention is prepared papers. So that can include, there's collages that make their own paper, and it's really beautiful work. I also want to make a plug here. You can make papers out of mushrooms. So if anyone's interested in a mushroom paper class, let me know, because that's something we could do. And then and then also, folks will also alter the papers, right? So you'll take some type of paper that you buy or maybe you found, and then you might stain it in different colors before you actually apply it to the collage. So that's still part of the process, but it's like an extended part of the process. And then there's washi and other decorative papers, and those are ones you might buy at the art store. I bought some for us tonight, so there's some on the table. And those are super fun to incorporate. Washi or rice paper is a little bit translucent, so it's really fun sometimes to layer it into the collage. And papers are also used to like add dimension to things. Some people will make integrated collages with their like watercolors or something like that. So it's adding texture to your other work. So collage can be used sort of as a enhancement as well, not just as like the main work. And then found objects. A lot of these are, non-paper things, fabrics, dried mushrooms, moss, seashells, pressed flowers, leaves, coins, mirrors, buttons, everything. Like literally anything you can think of can be used. And then I also, a lot of artists will embellish with other types of mediums, either before gluing or after. So things like watercolor, gold leaf, color pencils, ink. I have some watercolors and color pencils out as well. So if you wanted to use those to incorporate into your collage, you can. But again, unlimited options and possibilities. I have this collage here because this artist found this cardboard of a beer carton that a car ran over. And he said, "Oh, this is a treasure." And then he created this whole collage around this piece. And so that's what I mean. Often the scraps, it can come from anywhere. And it's a great piece and has great color. All right. And then these are the things that you may use to either hold it together, obviously adhesives, but then other things as well. I put some of my favorites down here, and I'll talk about those in a second. But so adhesives and finishes. So I think of adhesives as the stuff that's gonna, stick it to your substrate. Typically at this class or at mycology, when we talk about substrate, we're talking about what mushrooms grow on. But in this case, we're talking about what you're sticking your items, your stuff to create the collage. So you have the stuff that holds, all your papers or found objects together. And then you also have like protectant layers that you may add. So tonight, I personally use Yes Glue a lot because it holds like a lot like bigger objects and thicker things. So that's my personal favorite. It's also because I started in bookmaking, so that's why that's very popular there. But a lot of people just use Mod Podge for everything because it can do both the adhesive as well as the final layer. I also love the UHU glue stick. I use that a lot as well. But basically, you want to have an adhesive, and then you want to have something that's going to seal it as well. And then different people do that to various levels. So I have the Mod Podge over there that we'll use as a sealant tonight, and we'll use the Yes Glue or the glue sticks as the adhesive. And then for substrates tonight, we're using mixed media paper, but you can do a number of things. Really, the only requirement is that it's sturdy enough to hold up to whatever you're putting on it. So obviously if you're doing heavier pieces or if you're doing a lot of watercolor that's going to make it really damp, just make sure you have something thick enough to hold up to that. But I often will do mixed media watercolor paper or matte board if I want something just slightly thicker. I recently did an altar book collage, which is why I have it. I have books on the list as well. And then tools. Tonight we simplified, so we're just using scissors for cutting. But these are some of the other tools that I use at home. For the most part, I actually do use scissors. So you could have larger scissors for cutting, like kind of bigger, rougher cuts, and then more precision scissors for more detailed work. A lot of people use a straight knife or an X-Acto knife. I use scissors a lot because I like the control over it, but there are times when I like having the X-Acto knife to kind of get into the nooks and crannies that I can't get with scissors. I like using the bone folder. Sometimes it helps me get the glue out of the container, and you can also use it for pressing down papers. I do have some like wooden sticks over there, which is the poor man's version of that you guys can use for both getting the glue as well as if you want to, there's enough to use for pressing down as well. So yeah. And then I'll send out these materials. So if you guys, that way you can take a look at it later. And then before we get into design techniques, I just wanted to share other places this can go after this class. So a wonderful artist, Roberta Trenton, who I met at a recent mycology event, she created that one on the top left. It's made out of mushrooms, and then she does this cyanotope photographic technique on top of it to create it, but it's a beautiful work. And then to the upper right, is an artist, Joseph Cornell. He did both the top one on the right as well as the bottom one. He was a kind of a recluse in the outskirts of New York, but he loved collecting, going to stores and collecting his like sacred objects, as he would call them. And then he'd make these beautiful boxes where, this 3D elements, right, that he would include in his pieces. So this one is of a little girl it's meant to look like she's the bottom of a hot air balloon. And then he also did the bottom right. So I just want to share, this one is a surreal piece, right, where he's creating a new scene. So it's like a photograph of a woman, but then combining it with these other elements of nature, right, to create this undersea piece. So it's very beautiful, but his work wasn't meant to be political in any way. It was more of creating beauty in the world. And then there's a contemporary artist, which is the one in the middle, called Misprinted, and she does a lot of work, which she calls locative collage works. So she will build a collage and then put it in the world somewhere. And often it's meant to make a statement. This was on a corner where her friend was shot to death. And so she pasted this up on the wall. And so it has special meaning to her of what it means for this woman to be stitching together, life. But a lot of her stuff will have like deep political meaning, anti-war statement, that type of stuff. But often she'll put it very like a juxtaposed place in the real world for people to see, and as a way of bringing awareness to her work. And then the last two, so the one in the middle, this artist, she does washi paper on canvas, and she literally cuts out all these tiny little pieces and creates that pattern. And so it's kind of like this detailed work that creates this beautiful pattern. And she calls it, in our lives, we can only see a tiny piece of the puzzle. We can never see the full story. And that's kind of what she's trying to show in her work. But what I want to show there is that like she does all of her own like handmade paper type of stuff. So that's all, she creates all of that, and then she puts it together in the collage. And then the last one, the one on the left, is an example of watercolor with washi. So she does kind of this like faint watercolor. She said it was actually a failed watercolor piece, which is another common thing you'll hear artists do is, maybe it was a painting that didn't quite work out, so I'm going to collage some stuff over it and see what happens. But in this case, it's created this really ethereal looking piece. And some of the white pieces, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but some of the white pieces that are coming out is the washi white paper that's been kind of integrated in with her painting. All right, so that's just to inspire you, maybe after this class, if you want to take it further, some places where things could go. But right now, I just want to get into some of the design basics, and you don't need to remember all these things. This is just to kind of have it filter into your subconscious a little bit. And this is where we kind of get into being more intentional with our stuff. So This first one is just about what are these terms people use when they talk about design. And then the next one, we'll talk about the principles, and that's how you apply these to your artwork. So the first one is line, and this is very common in non-collage work, right? Like drawing the lines that you might draw on a page. In collage, it's less important, or it might be where the elements come together. And then you have shape, right? So, and shape can mean lots of things. It could be geometric, it can be organic, but it's meant more as like a flat shape. Whereas form is meant to, when you think of a drawing or painting, that's trying to create dimension. That's what form is, but it's more of the positive space versus space down here is meant to talk about the negative space. And in collage, negative space is really important. And then we have color, right? So how saturated or desaturated. So that's one part of the grid. And then the other one is value. So how light or dark something is. And then lastly is texture, which can create dimension. And in collage, that may be stuff like adding, things that are slightly raised, like moss or something to the collage. And then these are the principles. So when, like Bibi, when you were talking about, oh, how do I get better at it? It's really practicing some of these principles, but rules are meant to be broken as well. And it's not like every single one of these are gonna be in all of your artwork. But it's just nice to like have them in mind. And then when you're evaluating your collage or thinking about, should I add something, should I not, or should I move this around? It's nice to think about these things. Balance is, does the visual weight feel even, or are you intentionally trying to make sure that one area seems to have more weight than the other? Contrast is where you create differences in order to create more interest in the piece, right? So not everything is like the same color. So this could be, something that's light against something that's dark. Then you have emphasis, where you're trying to put more focus in one area, right, or on one element. That's an important one I think about a lot. Is sometimes people take like, and something maybe tonight, would be good to practice with is maybe there's one kind of main image or theme that you want to go with. So like focus on that, and then you can focus on how the other ones will support that thing. And then emphasis brings us to our next, which is movement and rhythm. And this is just kind of the psychology of how people look at a piece of artwork or a page, right? And it's the way you want to kind of have intention of how their eye is going to follow. So maybe you start with the thing that's emphasized, right? And then how is it going to progress into the rest of the artwork? And then the next two, we have pattern, which is consistency, right? And so you might want to create that in your piece in some way. And then separately, there's also variety, which is the opposite of making sure not everything's monotonous. And that one I think is also very important in collage work, is making sure that there's some intention there of creating some differences between the elements. And then the last one, unity, is about being intentional about how will all these things come together. So it might be a color scheme, it might be a theme that you want to talk about, but just having some thought into how all these pieces are connected and don't just feel like random pieces. So those are the main principles. It's not, a lot of these you probably already kind of like know intuitively, when you look at artwork and you're like, I know why I think that one's, or I think that one's a good artwork. I might not know why, but these kind of help you kind of put words to the why when you see something you like versus something you don't like. Yeah, these are just things to keep in mind. So any questions before we move on to the next section? All right. So real quick, I'm just going to walk through an example, and then we're going to get in and start working on it ourselves. This is the way I do it. It's definitely not like necessarily the way everyone does it. I also want to say this is very nonlinear, as I was doing this example collage, I realized how nonlinear it was. So don't take this like, oh, you have to do this step and then you have to do this step. This is what I love about collage also. It's like, you might start with collecting. I didn't even use most of that stuff up there. So like, you might be like, oh yeah, this is what I'm gonna do. And then you put like 1 or 2 pieces down and you're like, no, it's not. And then you're gonna go back to the table and get new things. And then that might happen a few different times. It might even happen after you glue something down, and that's okay too. So just keep an open mind to it, and that's what I love about it. I feel like more than anything else, for me, it can be very much a creative flow thing where you don't necessarily have to have everything planned out. And then sometimes you do. So the book collage I did back there, I knew the scene I wanted to create. I wanted it to look like a little magical mushroom land inside that book. But I didn't even end up using the pieces I thought I was going to use. And I also, like, it was ridiculous how many pieces I thought I could fit into one little scene. But like the main mushroom was going to be an amanita mushroom, and I put it in there and it didn't look great. You know, that wasn't the mushroom was supposed to be there. But you couldn't convince me that until I put it down in the book. So you just don't know. Even when you think you have a plan, likely there's going to be changes to that plan. And so it's a really cool, almost like meditation where you can kind of like let go a little bit of control and let it take you where it will. But let's still start by going over to the table and like gathering some pieces that we want to play with. Like I said, I might encourage you, if you're kind of newer to collage, to maybe pick 1 or 2 that you think you like would kind of want to make kind of like the centerpiece or the theme, and then maybe a few other ones. Start with just a few, like I would say like 5 or 6 different pieces. And then of course you can always go back. There's so much stuff, as always, with all collages or secret orders. So, you know.
We're not so secret.
Yeah. And then this part, actually I want to show you something. So when I was putting this stuff down, that there's like a blue watercolor piece in the back. I made that before I started putting stuff down. I think I put a different piece of blue down, and I was like, oh, I want this mushroom to be on like a lighter blue color. So I just wanted to say that because part of gathering might also be creating your materials, right? So yes, gathering might be bringing, you know, your found objects together, but it might be, hey, I want to like do a little watercolor background, or I want to stain this paper I want to use. So it could also be considering like preparing the stuff that you might want to alter. As an example, I had that field guide book and I cut out a big hole in it, right, to put the collage inside of it. So that was like the prep work I did before I even considered, you know, placing things down. So then we have cutting or tearing, right? I think I did both in this collage that I did. We don't have self-healing mats here today because they're expensive, but so we're using scissors only. At home, though, I just wanted to show you kind of like what I do at home is most of it, like I said, I just use scissors anyways, but I would just did this so I could show you, like I'll use the X-Acto knife to try to cut out the white parts inside. And that's kind of like a more advanced technique because it's not easy, but I like to try to make it look as real as possible, meaning that you can't see the white paper in it. I think it really stands out. And then when you put it against something, you know, you'll see the paper behind where you've cut out. So it looks really cool. I also have this thing when I'm cutting where it's like you're painting with the scissor in a way or sculpting with it. And it can be very cool. So I try to really get all the edges, all the tiny nuances of the image, and it really does make a difference. And this is where, you know, arrange or rearrange the pieces that you have. Like I said, it's like likely you're going to change them quite a bit. So I created this and I was like, I feel like this is too boring. And so before I started gluing, I ended up doing like this little gold leaf around the mushroom. I decided I wanted to stand out more. And And so that's just an example of kind of like, okay, this isn't quite right, so then I'm gonna go back, I add the gold leaf, and then you kind of like arrange again, and then so forth. I went back and forth with that for a while. It helps to look at things from a new perspective. I think that's a life lesson too, but and this is also where you can think about some of those design principles, right? Like something doesn't look quite right. Is it a balance thing? Do I need to add more variety? These are good times to ask some of those questions that can help. Often this is when I'll go back to the forage table, right, and take a look and kind of, often it'll be all of a sudden something I totally wasn't expecting to pick out. I'll be like, it just kind of pop out and I'll be like, yeah, that's what I need. I didn't know I needed that, but that's what I need. And then we start gluing it together. And I gotta be honest, I've unglued a lot of things I've glued, so it's never too late. I've heard other artists say this, and I feel this is the same thing. You're never done collaging something. I have something on my wall, and I was like, I don't like it. And I realized why I didn't like it. And I was like, I have a plan to take it down and, do some more work on it. But that's like one of the cool things about collage is that it's never quite done. That's a good thing because it means it's so flexible. This is just a personal thing I do. Sometimes I'll like wrap the paper around to the back to create like a cleaner edge to it. So this is some washi paper that was a little bit translucent and had some like gold pieces in it. And so, but I wanted to integrate the top part more to create like just more of a kind of just texture to make it feel more like, some clouds in the sky type of a thing. But then I wanted the bottom one not to be integrated, and that's like a torn, also somewhat see-through piece, but I wanted to feel like the ground and be disconnected, like the mushrooms are kind of hovering above the ground. So that's kind of my process of going back and forth on some of these things. And then, well, lastly, once we feel good about it for the evening at least, we can coat it with a sealant. I forgot to bring one of my collages, but I'm not always great about doing this, to be honest, because a lot of times I'm just making it for myself. I'm like, whatever. But the one I forgot at home, it actually has pressed flowers on it, and the color is like completely not as good. So there is benefit, I think, to doing the sealant, especially if you're, selling the pieces. You absolutely need to do that and probably varnish them as well. But so tonight, to make sure that it's, it holds up to the elements, I do have the sealant over there. And the main thing is a lot of the collage materials, because they're found, you're not going to be acid-free paper. So that's why you want to protect them. Anyways, and that was kind of a whirlwind / a lot of me talking. But we're about to get into the fun part. But does anyone have any questions before we get started? Yeah.